Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, chefs, wherever you are watching from, whichever channel you're watching from. My name is Dilip Puri. I'm the founder and CEO of the Indian School of Hospitality. And it is my great pleasure to have with us Mr. Vir Sanghvi. He really doesn't need an introduction. Hello, Vir, and welcome, and thank you for being on this session.
Thank you for inviting me, Dilip.
We, I think most people in this audience know you as probably half the world knows you as a journalist, as an author, as a columnist, as an editor, as a television anchor. What I think would be interesting is more to know who's Veer as Veer Sanghvi? I mean, I read up. You went to Mayo College. You studied in England. You went to Oxford. Did you always want to be a journalist, or was this something which happened along the way? Like some chefs say, "As a paida hoti, I wanted to be a chef." How was it for you?
Complete accident, Dilip. I had no intention of becoming anything. I was not one of those guys who had a plan for his life. I still am not. I'm still the kind of guy things happen to. I had finished in England. You have this. I did 2 years of school in England, and you have this. You had in those days this strange system whereby you stayed behind for a term. You took the entrance exam for Oxford, and if you got in, you had from December to October when the term began, completely free. So I went back and taught at Mayo for a term. And the rest of the time, I sort of hung around in Delhi, in Bombay more than Delhi, actually. And some people I knew were opening a magazine and they couldn't get anyone to write. So I said I'd do it. And I was enthusiastic, I was young, and most important, I was cheap. So they were very happy to get me to write. And I started writing and I wrote all the way till I went to Oxford. By when they were quite pleased with what I was doing. And I came back the following December, that same December, and they said, keep doing this. And then it became a routine. I spent 6 months a year at Oxford, 6 months in India writing. The magazine became quite famous. It became India Today. And in 78, just before I finished at Oxford, they said to me, we want to start a city magazine dedicated to the city of Bombay. Will you be the editor? And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I had no other plans at that time. So I said, sure. I came back. We launched Bombay Magazine. And the rest, as you say, is boredom.
But if you had to do it all over again, Veer, would it be the same things you'd do, or would there be something else?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the logical thing for me to have done was to have become a lawyer. But that would have involved several more years of study, and I really didn't have the patience for that.
Why is it
Also, I mean,
logical?
Oxford has this strange system whereby they have a careers committee that advises you, and they advised me and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I had no interest in staying in England. I wanted to come home. This is my country. And I said, "Well, I'll stay on if you can get me into the international rock business." Thinking, yeah, these are old dons. What will they do? But Oxford is a remarkable place. They got me a job with EMI, the world's largest record company at that time, and said, you can become a rock music executive. So I was a little frightened. I went back and resumed journalism.
Okay. Maybe that's what you would have chosen to do, and we would have had Veer Sanghvi, the rock star, rather than the journalist you are.
Yeah, out of business because the music industry is dead. So you'd have had Vir Sanghvi, your friends scrounging on you for a loan or something because they're all unemployed now. So it was the right decision.
Indeed, indeed. And you've written on pretty much everything from politics, lifestyle, people. Uh, when did this thing with food happen? I mean, I don't think you started off doing that, but somewhere, and even there, it's evolved over time. But for now, just tell us, like, where did this thing about food happen, or writing about it?
It's it's always been accidental, Dilip. When we started Bombay Magazine, and Bombay Magazine was pretty clearly patterned on New York Magazine, and New York Magazine had restaurant writing, and we said we should do it. And because I traveled a fair amount and because I knew about restaurants, I said I would do the restaurant reviews. So we were probably the first people in India in that era, it's now 79, 80, to do critical reviews of restaurants. I gave up Bombay. I went abroad. I came back. I became editor of another magazine. And there was in those days a paper in Bombay called the Sunday Observer. And I spoke to them. And they said, you can do the restaurant reviews for us. And I said, I will do them anonymously. So I used to sign them Vikram Sinha. And it worked really well. It worked about for about 8 months, 9 months. Nobody knew who Vikram Sinha was. By the ninth month, the whole industry had figured out who I was. So I was no longer getting anything resembling the average experience. And then I forgot about restaurants. And then when I became editor of the Hindustan Times in 2000, I think, we were relaunching the Hindustan Times Sunday magazine, the precursor of what is Brunch now. And I said, you need a food piece because food is going to be really big in the 21st century. And so I did one for the dummy just to show them what it should be like. Of course, they couldn't find anyone else to do it. And they said, Chalo, yeah, you've done it, you do it. So I did. And that's how I got into it. So like most things in my life, purely accidentally.
But that's interesting. I mean, you got into it accidentally, but everything you write and talk about, it's so emotive and passionate when it comes to how you write about food. So there must have been something about food which otherwise also attracted you, or was it just because you had to
Yeah.
write about it?
Yeah, I've always been interested in food. I've always been interested in regional cuisine, in global cuisine, in ingredients, about how to tell the difference between not just good and bad, but mediocre and good, or good and very excellent. I've always wanted to know about hotels because I've traveled a lot. So there was a passion. It just never occurred to me I could turn it into a career. And frankly, till the 21st century, I couldn't have. It's just I took a bet saying the 21st century will be the year of food, travel, hotels. And as it turned out, I was right.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. So that brings me to an interesting question. You foresaw that this would be food would become a much bigger trend, and it's as big as it is today. But again, it's going to change. I don't think in 2000 you might have envisaged 2021 and beyond. You were right up to 2020, and I guess the
Yeah.
crux of the question is that one has to now visualize. Most people today, when you ask that question, will tell you, yeah, I don't have a crystal ball anymore. But would you be willing for, especially for our audience and chefs, people in the culinary food world, what's your projection for what's going to happen?
I've always been an optimist. I don't think anyone could have predicted this pandemic, and we shouldn't beat ourselves over not being able to predict it or expect it or take precautions. But equally, it's clear that all pandemics end. In 1919, you had the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed what? 1/5 of India's population. Even that ended. It took 2 years and it killed a lot of people, but it ended. Life returned to normal. Here, I think it will end not just because it works its way through the population, though it's doing a good job of that at the moment, but because I think by early next year there will be a vaccine. And if enough people are vaccinated, and certainly people who work in hotels, restaurants, and people who stay in them will probably be among the first 20% or so of people who get the vaccine, there's no reason why life shouldn't return to normal. So this year has been a write-off, but I'm very optimistic about next year.
Uh, but do you think that some things will change
Yes.
in food and beverage, whether it's people's habits or some social cultural changes? What should we think about those changes of the future with this pandemic and post?
Yeah, it's fashionable to say that because of this epidemic, people are going to be much more conscious of hygiene. And in the future, you'll have to super sanitize your kitchens. You'll have to do all kinds of stuff. But I'm not sure that's true. I think this is just a sort of obvious knee jerk prediction to make. The truth is, you can't really get COVID from food. You get COVID from people. So you're more likely to get it from going to a crowded bar, going to a crowded restaurant, than you are from food. So even if the guy sanitizes his kitchen shelves 4 times, I don't think it makes that much difference. So my personal experience of going out and seeing things is people are not that obsessed with sanitization or whatever. Bit by bit, it took a long time, and I think the delivery industry broke that down. The view, the misplaced notion that COVID was spread by food has died out. People don't, unfortunately, seem to realize that it's spread by contact with people. You've seen that in bars in Bombay, Delhi. People are still hanging out too close to each other, are still not following social distancing norms. But if you are conscious of social distancing norms, you can, and you wear masks, you can, on the whole, avoid COVID. And once it ends, I think life will take a 3 month, 4 month adjustment period, but life will return to normal. I don't believe that we'll all go to restaurants in masks and tell waiters, stay 6 feet away from me or whatever. This is a blip. This is not the shape of things to come.
I think I would agree. I think it's absolutely a blip, but I do believe that well, let me not say social habits, socio-cultural habits. I mean, the fact that, for example, the trends have been about eating healthier, eating more wellness-based stuff. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. Back in '96, when my first hotel as a GM, I went to my chef, my executive chef, and said, "Yeah, we must make nice, good ghar ka khana wala food in our hotel. Our customers will like that." And for the first 3 months, the food just bombed. And when we started asking customers, they said, "Ghar ka khana hota to ghar pe hi khate. Agar bahar aake kha rahe hain, we want to indulge." Now, clearly, that was 25 years ago. But today, I think we're all seeing more and more people, even with fine dining, luxury dining, expensive dining, this whole notion about is it healthy, this move towards things like veganism, all of that. What are trends going to be in that, in your view?
Sure. I think there will be trends, and I think the lockdown, or sort of lockdown, has changed our attitude to food. I am not convinced that people are eating more healthily because of COVID than they were before. If you're going to get COVID at a restaurant, you're as likely to get it from butter chicken as you are from a salad. So I'm not sure that's going to be the problem. But what has happened, I think, and that's something the restaurant industry should look up and take notice of, is that delivery has scored a mark. People have realized that the food at the average restaurant can easily be replicated by a cloud kitchen or a ghost kitchen, whatever you want to call it. And because a cloud kitchen does not have the overheads of a restaurant, they can supply it to you much cheaper. Given that it's so easy now to get perfectly acceptable food at home, the challenge for restaurants is going to be, why will people come? What am I offering that is so special? Until the pandemic was over and is over, and until there is the lockdown culture, you can't really do much more in the way of hospitality. But I think in the future, you will have to focus much more on the experience, on the novelty of the menu, to get people to want to come out of their homes and recover and rediscover what the restaurant experience is like. I think that's the first major change that people are going to face. The second is the obvious economic one. If fewer people are going to restaurants, if delivery cloud kitchens have taken over, then many restaurants will have to re-examine their economics. They'll also have to re-examine their liquor pricing. Most of us now, if we do want to drink it at home. And are we going to go and pay those hugely inflated markups for the kind of liquor we've got used to drinking this year in the future? I think there's a question mark about it. And as for hotels, I think there's going to be a big change. One thing that this has taught us is that we don't really need to travel as much as we thought we did. We still need to travel. If you're running a company, there is no substitute for going and meeting your people, motivating them, taking their mood, all of that I accept. But this kind of conversation, the kind we're having now, which once upon a time we'd have done in a packed hall in Aerocity or somewhere, we don't necessarily have to do any longer. So as that realization sinks in, I think there will be less travel. If there is less travel, there are less hotel rooms sold.
So that's not a very good portent for the
No.
hospitality industry. So you're now saying that food and beverage, culinary cuisine, the independent pieces, those can kind of come back to post-COVID normalcy, but hotels have to relook at their business models entirely.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think so. I think the general view in the hotel industry is that we tell you we'll reduce your housekeeping, my staff will wear masks, and we'll sanitize your room before you check in, and they'll all come back. I don't think that is the problem. I don't think people are not going to go to hotels post-vaccine because of sanitary or health reasons. They're just going to ask ourselves, do we need to make this expenditure? If you and I are taking our families on holiday, we'll make that effort because we like it. But if I want to fly in India, a lot of people used to fly in on one-day trips just to meet the staff, just to take a meeting. We will ask ourselves, do we really need to do this? And more than that, our companies will start saying, do I really need to spend so much on travel? Airfares are expensive, hotels are expensive. Isn't this one item where I can reduce costs? So that's going to affect the hotel industry, unfortunately.
And again, a newer trend one is seeing, to the point you were making, that short driving holidays, smaller places, don't need to be in big hotels. Is that something that's going to be a continued trend, or is it again as more just post-COVID they want to get out, so they're doing that?
I think the driving trend will continue for a while. I'll give you my own experience. Me and my wife, we've been on 2 holidays so far. We went first, sort of tipping our toes into the water gently. We went to the Grand Bharat in Manesar, which is only about an hour or so from our homes. And that was a great experience. And so we got daring. And we went to Jaipur, we went to Rajvilas. And though the drive was 3.5 hours or so, we thought it was wonderful. We loved it. We're going this weekend, inshallah, to the Amman in Alba, because again, we think driving holidays are probably the way forward. It gets a bit claustrophobic being at home. Will we feel the same way once there's a vaccine and air travel returns to normal? Possibly not. I know for myself, this is probably the first year in my life when I haven't seen the sea for so long. I grew up in Bombay, I grew up by the sea. So, yeah, I'd miss beaches, I miss the sea, I'd like to go out. So, I think eventually we'll get over driving holidays and take aeroplanes. But certainly, like has happened with delivery, even when you don't need to have delivery, and you can go to restaurants because you've got so used to delivery, you like the idea of doing delivery. The same thing will happen with holidays, because it suddenly occurred to you that driving door to door rather than going to an airport, checking in, waiting for your flight, seeing it delayed, collecting your luggage is simpler. I think driving holidays will get a boost no matter what happens.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. So coming back to some of your writings on food, hospitality, uh, at least I've noticed, and I've always, followed you and read what you write about our industry. You used to write a lot about hotels, luxury hotels, hospitality. I've seen more over the recent years, the restauranting, and then now more like your recent articles were about, about street foods and about burgers and about diet fat. Has that change again been conscious, or are you just seeing trends, or are you addressing different demographics? How do you look at that?
No, it's just trends that I don't think. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but I don't think there's anything exciting happening in the Indian hotel industry. There's nothing you could write about in Indian hotels today that you couldn't write about 5 years ago. It's more of the same. That's not true of the restaurant industry, where there have been changes. And when it comes to street food, I feel a sort of personal commitment because I'm always part of this street food festival every year. The company I work with, Culinary Culture, we do street food awards because I believe that the guys who make street food are often the most talented creators of food in India. And they're treated like shit. They're beaten up by the cops, they're pushed around by the municipal corporation. I feel a certain obligation to do something for street food. But if somebody changed the paradigm of the hotel industry, if something dramatic happened, I'd happily go back to writing more about luxury hotels. But there is that much to write about.
So what's your advice for them? What should the luxury hotels and what paradigm shift do they need to make?
I'm fine. I mean, if it ain't broke, why fix it? I think I'm in a minority on this, but I believe that India has the best hotels in the world because, of course, the hardware is not that difficult to do. Anybody can hire the same architects, the same designers, they're global. But I think what makes the difference is people. People talk about Asian hospitality and how people in Asia are so willing to go the extra mile for you, which is true. But in most of Asia, except perhaps Singapore, where they're too arrogant to do anything anyway, there's usually a language problem. You can't really communicate. If people have a program, they will go with the program. They'll be smiley, smiley. They'll be nice to you. But if you ask them to go off the program, if there's something unusual that they have to do, they're completely finished because they don't have that discretion. They don't have that comfort factor with the English language. In India, on the other hand, Indian hotels and even chefs, I've gone to food conferences with international food writers, and they've always said to me after meeting Indian chefs that, if I was in England, I would never find a room full of chefs who were as intelligent and as well educated. The people in our industry, in our hotel industry, are possibly the most educated and most intelligent of any hotel industry or restaurant industry anywhere in the world. So when you go to an Indian hotel and something goes wrong and there's a problem, even the guy at a relatively low level is empowered and thinks enough to be able to do it. So I think that's a huge, huge achievement, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because this paradigm shift, especially when it comes to food and beverage in hotels, since we're talking about that, I mean, uh, hotels, I've always believed, and look, I'm also looking at it outside in now, right? Till 4 years ago, I
Yeah.
was very much a part of this, hospitality industry. But now looking at it outside in, which you always had a perspective, my own view is that when you look at the real estate perspective, hotels should have restauranting spaces. They just shouldn't be operating it themselves. When you
Yeah.
think about why standalones do well or why there's more creativity in the outside world outside of hotels, sometimes chefs in hotels are more restricted. I mean, they have to follow a larger organization. But if you in designing building a hotel had enough curbside spaces available to do this, then the hotel's still the destination, and you have, and that happens in some parts of the world. In
Yeah.
Europe, for example, I think that's the paradigm shift which hotels have to give that up, saying that we are the culinary and F&B experts as well as great hoteliers. They're great hoteliers. But I think recognizing that, I wish that is something which is an outcome because we couldn't do that. We were restricted by so many things, even in my time in the industry. Do you think that's something which it will give hotels and hospitality a whole different way of looking at food and beverage and customers too? So, you don't have to go to standalone eateries, which are challenging from the infra or parking or this or that. You can still go, but you're not eating in a hotel restaurant.
Yeah, I think this business of opening 4 or 5 restaurants per property was forced on hotels. If you take the great American companies, the Hiltons, the Sheratons, when they opened hotels in America, they didn't necessarily have 6 restaurants and 2 bars. It's when they went out, when they came to other countries, they realized there wasn't much of a local restauranting scene, and they opened many, many restaurants. Let's take your own old company. Let's take Sheraton, which when it opened in Bombay in 1973, the Oberoi Sheraton, as it then was, they opened what, 8 outlets? If they'd opened in Chicago that year, they'd have had 2. It's just hotels were overcompensating for the lack of a restaurant scene in the places they opened. But in the case of most countries, I have to say, it made very little difference to the restaurant scene because there were expat chefs, there were expat F&B managers, they had international models. They opened the same restaurants everywhere. The one place where it was different was India, because India fought off for many years the invasion of foreign hotel chains. I mean, they came, but none of them really had the impact that Indian hotel chains had. And because Indian hotel chains were obliged now to open 4 restaurants per hotel or 5 restaurants per hotel, they were innovative. They thought of things. Pretty much everything that's happened to the food scene in India in the last 30 years has happened because of innovations within the hotel industry. Hoteliers had the means to go out, open things. In 1974, the Taj Group opened the Golden Dragon in Bombay, created the craze for Sichuan cuisine, changed Chinese food forever. The Oberois opened the first Baan Thai, made Thai food respectable. So Italian food, Trattoria, again opened by the Taj, was the first proper Italian restaurant in Bombay. So I don't want to undermine or in any way underestimate the contribution of the hotel industry to the food scene. Some of India's greatest chefs are hotel chefs. And even now, if you talk to a chef who's very good, you talk to, say, Manish Mehrotra is probably India's greatest chef. He trained at the president. You talk to Gagan Anand, who's the most famous Indian chef anywhere in the world. He trained at the Taj Palace. So the hotel industry has played a huge role in promoting food in India. Almost all of the great chefs have hotel backgrounds. But yes, you're right. The local restaurant industry has now come of age. There is no need for hotels to go that extra mile to break from the international format and also have huge F&B packages and have F&B divisions and chefs. You can sort of sit back, maybe run 1 or 2 outlets yourselves, and let others do a New York. Let others come in and run restaurants on your spaces. Or maybe you don't even need to do that. We're talking about your old company, the St. Regis in New York, the original St. Regis, had an Alain Ducasse restaurant. Alain Ducasse rented the space from them. It didn't do that well. They closed it down. And as far as I know, they never replaced it because they took the line that if you came to a city like New York, you didn't want to stay in your hotel. You wanted to go out. We're not there yet in India, but I think we're getting to that stage.
Mm. So, talking about the Indian hotel chains and the international hotel chains, uh, how do you think they've done in managing, firstly, this pandemic situation we are in? And I want to kind of just have a quick focus on people, how they've been perceived, what all they've done. Have you seen any, different things which, when you kind of put Indian chains and the international players around, have you observed anything over the last few months?
I actually have to say that I haven't seen much difference. Everybody's done their best to cope with the pandemic, and there's no way in which foreign chains with their global expertise and experience are better than Indian chains, or Indian chains understand the environment better, so they're better. But there is one difference, which is at least till now, Indian chains tend to own the majority of their big hotels. If they own the majority of their properties, they have greater freedom of action in deciding how to treat their people. Foreign chains, on the whole, manage other people's hotels. So if you say you don't want to have salary cuts, you don't want to have staff cuts, it's not just you. You have to persuade the owner that he should spend more money on people because people are important. Some owners will, some will not. And the job of anybody who runs a foreign hotel chain is individual becomes so much more difficult because of this owner factor.
Indeed, it does. Indeed, it does. So, but the reality is, we're in this time and going forward, there are job losses across certainly hospitality, F&B, every thing which is under the broad umbrella of tourism. And I know you articulated that on many forums as well. So, in the recovery, and our audience is chefs and hospitality people. So, what would be your young students? I mean, my institution this year, we had, literally parents asking us, whose kids were passionately wanting to come and study either hospitality or culinary arts. But the parents' question was, अरे इस इंडस्ट्री का कुछ होगा क्या पैंडेमिक के बाद कि इनको ये पढ़ना चाहिए कि नहीं? So, it is actually coming down to that. And particularly, I think, with all the kinds of news, somehow, and rightly so, tourism has taken the biggest hit. So, more people, including parents, are questioning should our kids get into any of these sectors related to hospitality, travel, tourism, food, and beverage. What would be your advice for those people?
Well, my view on hospitality and on chefs particularly is I don't think there is a threat. There may be a threat to restaurants, which you articulated, but even a cloud kitchen will need chefs, right? So if you have a skill and you know how to cook, you're fine. I remember when I joined journalism, I started writing, as I told you, in 1976. Those were the years of the emergency, and there was no journalism possible. There was press censorship. And people said to my family, is he crazy? He's going to journalism. Journalism is dying. Well, here I am 50 years later. So don't worry too much, I think, about what people tell you about what's happening next month or what will happen the month after that. If you're joining an industry, you have to take a long term view. I don't think the hospitality industry, and particularly the food business, is ever really going to go bust.
Indeed, I wish I'm going to make sure that students and parents who are looking at hospitality and culinary arts hear what you just said. So, well, that was
I'll
great.
make one more. Make one more point, Dilip, which is that courses like the ones you offer, these are global courses, right?
Yeah,
Somebody who comes out of your institution can get a job anywhere in the world.
yeah.
As the world has shrunk, as people have recognized the worth and value of Indian professionals, even assuming for the purpose of argument that there are problems with the Indian hotel industry, a qualified Indian hotel professional is now employable and desirable globally. In how many industries can you say that? This is one of our core strengths, and it would be crazy to throw it away.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think so many leaders are emerging who are Indian and who are running. You think of Raj Menon, you think of so many people who are,
Yeah.
and that actually I think builds
Rakesh
a lot.
Sarna in the old days, Puneet Chatwal, all these guys grew up to head their companies.
Yeah,
Raj is, of course, the most stunning example at the moment. But I think people are realizing, and you go to hotels abroad, there was a time when Indians were restricted to accounts or kept in the back of the house. You see many more Indians out front. You see many more Indians being the faces of the hotels. So this is, forget about the pandemic for a year. This is in many ways a springboard for future conquest of the international hotel business by Indians. It would be crazy for us to give up because of a one-year pandemic.
And would you say the same for chefs as well in terms of their internationality and their ability to pretty much see the
Yeah,
world as their
oh,
oyster?
without a doubt. If you talk to an Indian chef, because of his training and because of where he's worked, he can cook Indian food, of course, that's in his blood. But he's been trained at cooking European food or continental food. And now, because of the popularity in India, he can do Oriental food as well. Can you show me chefs in any other country that have that range, that can do so many different cuisines? That's what makes Indian chefs employable around the world. You give them a task, you give them a cuisine, they'll do it. You get an expat Chinese chef, you're not going to put him in your French restaurant, no? But an Indian chef, you could.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, we're running out of time, Veer.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask for some last words of confidence and inspiration to our audience, particularly chefs, that they should be looking forward to better days and better things. And what would your message for them be?
Yeah, I mean, the standard message to give is that, look, this is not going to last forever. This will end, which I think we all know. But the message for chefs, which people usually give, is that Indian food is now poised to take over the world. There are more Indian restaurants in other cities. You're doing in other cities of the world. You're doing the right things. But I think for chefs, particularly for the chefs in this audience, it's important to realize that their fortunes are not necessarily tied to Indian food. Indian chefs can cook any other kind of cuisine. And as less and less people are willing to go into the kitchen, work long hours, and that's happening in the West because people have got lazier, Indians will always be the best, will always be in demand. So if you're going to become a chef, remember that, say, an Indian journalist can't find a job abroad. An Indian accountant may have difficulty finding a job abroad. But an Indian chef is one of the few people. An Indian chef and an Indian software professional are probably the only Indians who are desired and are employable everywhere in the world.
Fantastic. So just to recap what we heard
Yeah.
from Veer over this last half hour, clearly you started off saying delivery is a big thing, and I think people in F&B need to be mindful. You confirmed that the COVID is a bit of a blip, and it will happen. It'll take its time, but
Yeah.
as soon as vaccines come, we should be back to normal. You highlighted the opportunities with cloud kitchens and a lot of people getting into that, and perhaps some real opportunities for kitchen culinary professionals to do that in whatever hotels and restaurants have to do. Unless they can come out with some really unique experiences, it's unlikely that they'll see the same level of business which they perhaps saw before. And they have to make some major changes, both the big hotels as well as restaurants in general. And I think lastly, you said that uh, Indians, both hotelier, hospitality professionals, chefs, need to now really see themselves as global citizens. They are not restricted to India at all. Whether they're going to be running hotels as general managers or whether they're going to be setting up restaurants, and not just Indian restaurants, Indian chefs are now going to be able to go anywhere and do any cuisine. Pretty much the world's their oyster, we all hope. Thank you very much, Veer, for your time,
Thank
and
you,
thank
Dilip.
the audience for
My
listening
pleasure.
in.
It
Bye
was a
bye.
real pleasure.
Thank you.